and here cross pollination is the only option. Now dichogamy. In some plants, the stamen and carpels are not matured at the same time. That is why uh, I mean pollination is not possible. So here only option is cross pollination for these plants in which stamen and carpels are not matured at the same time. They mature at different timings. That means only cross pollination is possible for these plants. Then self sterility. Self sterility means this is a condition in which even if the stigma receives pollen grain from the anthers of the same flower, the pollen fails to undergo further growth. In such cases, only the pollen grain from different plants of the same species can effectively complete the process of setting of seeds. That means only option is cross pollination. Then a harcogamy, that means mechanical or structural barrier. In some flowers, the pollen of a flower cannot reach the stigma of the same flower due to some covering on the stigma, which that means covering of stigma which acts as a mechanical barrier. I think you understood. That means it occurs in bisexual flower. That means the flower contains both male and female reproductive part, but self-pollination can be occurred. Why? Now, because the stigma is covered by a mechanical barrier or any kind of covering. That is why here cross pollination is the only option of pollination. 5 number or last one is heterostyle. In such flowers, the stigma and anthers grow at different heights, which does not favor self-pollination. That is why here also only cross-pollination is the option for pollination. Now, the next point is agents of pollination. You know that there are several external agents which helps in cross pollination, and these are insect, wind, water, bird, elephant, human being, and artificially pollination also can be occurred. Now pollination by insect is called entomophily, pollination by wind called anemophily, pollination by water is called hydrophily, pollination by bird is called ornithophily, pollination by elephant is called elephophily. Some characteristics of entomophilous plant, anemophilous plant, hydrophilous plant, ornithophilous plant are given in the book, which is very easy. We just go through the points. I hope that you will be able to understand. Now pollination, these are the pollination which is occurred naturally. All kinds of pollination here, I mean agents by insect, by wind, by water, by bird, by elephant, all these are natural kind of pollination. Pollination can also be occurred artificially. This is called by human being, obviously. That is called artificial pollination. It is also called a hybridization. Hybridization is also a kind of artificial pollination. Now pollination is very important. Actually pollination is the starting step of fertilization. You know that what is fertilization? Fertilization means fusion of male gamete. Here the male gametes are pollen grains with the female gametes, that means ova or ovum, is called fertilization. After fertilization, what happened? Just go through the next slide. Here you know that the pollen grains are the male gamete. Here the structure of pollen grains are given. You just go through the diagram, B number diagram. See a pollen grain, the parts are given here. You just go through left hand side, different parts of a mature pollen grain. Exine. Exine is the outer wall. Now see the diagram. Exine. Intine, that is inner wall. and a pollen grain has two nucleus. The larger one is called generative nucleus and the smaller one is called tube nucleus. So parts of pollen grains are given here: exine, intine, tube nucleus and generative nucleus. Actually afterwards generative nucleus divides to form two sperm nuclei, and these two sperm nuclei are called male gametes actually. Now the process of, I am discussing about the process of fertilization. It is not given here. Just listen what happens when the pollen grains fall on the stigma. Now under suitable conditions, the cytoplasm of pollen grain absorbs sugar and water from the stigma and bulges out to produce a tube which is called pollen tube. You just go through the diagram, very nicely given here. Pollen tube. Pollen tube, by breaking down exine of pollen grains. I think you are understanding. If you see the diagram very carefully, you will be able to understand. Then this tube grows down through the stigma and style towards the ovary. The tip of the pollen tube enters the ovary through a very small opening which is called micropyle. Then the generative nucleus of the pollen grain divides and forms two male gamete nuclei, also called sperm nuclei. I have told already, sperm nuclei. Then the ovule contains the egg cell inside the embryonic sac or embryo sac. We just go through the diagram. Embryo sac, antipodal, it's not given here clearly. Okay, you just see the you just go through the diagram. Antipodal cells, polar nuclei and egg nuclei, synergids. All these portions are remaining in a sac-like structure. The innermost round-shaped sac-like structure, it is called embryo sac. Embryo sac contains 7 cells. Upper 3 cells are called antipodal cells. Lower 3 cells are there. Amongst the lower 3 cells, the middle one is called egg cell, and the 2 side cells are called synergids. So there are 3 cells at the lower portion of embryo sac. The middle one is called egg cell, and other 2 cells are called synergids. Upper 3 cells are called antipodal cells, and at the middle cells are called cells. Actually, it's not cell actually. Middle nuclei is called polar nuclei. Okay. Then the generative nucleus of pollen grain divides and forms 2 male gamete nuclei, also called sperm nuclei. Okay. Then the tip of the pollen tube, after entering ovary through the micropyle, ruptures and discharges the 2 male gametes into the embryo sac. 2 male gametes, that is 2 sperm nuclei, enter into the embryo sac. One of the male gamete, one of the sperm nuclei fuses with the egg. That means the middle one of lower 3 cells, and form zygote. This is fertilization. This fusion is called fertilization. Another male gamete fuses with the secondary nucleus, that is 2 polar nuclei at the middle, and forms the endosperm. That means endosperm is